بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this event. The best words are the words of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. So we're going to start off with some ayat from Surah Al-Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أياما معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصمه ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداع إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. صدق الله al-Azim. So as I said, thank you so much for joining us today for our event about the moon calculations with Dr. Jasser Auda. Just to introduce MAC as an organization, the Muslim Association of Canada is a national religious and non-profit organization. MAC's mission is to establish an Islamic presence in Canada that is balanced, constructive, and integrated through though distinct in the social fabric and culture of Canada. MAC Calgary chapter has been serving the Muslim community since 1999 through its diverse programs and activities, including a MAC Islamic school, youth programs, MAC Give, Al Salam Academy, MAC United Soccer Club, Iman, Eid Fest, and others. For more information about our programs, you can visit our website, www.maccalgary.ca, or follow us on Facebook at MAC Calgary. And to introduce our speaker here, Professor Jasser Auda is a scholar of Islamic legal theory, especially the higher purposes Maqasid of the Islamic law. He's the president of Maqasid Institute Global, a think tank registered in the USA, UK, Malaysia, and Indonesia. A visiting professor at the Study of Islam at Carleton University, Canada, a visiting professor at the Rule of Law Institute, Faculty of Law, Loyola University of Chicago, Loyola University Chicago, and Al-Shatibi Chair for Maqasid Studies at the International Peace University in South Africa. He's a founding and board member of the International Union for Muslim Scholars, an executive member of the Fiqh Council of North America, a member of the European Council for Fatwa and Research, and a fellow of the Fiqh Academy of India. He has a PhD in the philosophy of Islamic law from the University of Wales, UK, and a PhD in systems analysis from the University of Waterloo, Canada. Early in his life, he memorized the Quran and undertook traditional studies at the study circles of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, Egypt. He worked previously as a professor at the Universities of Waterloo and Ryerson in Canada, Alexandria University in Egypt, Faculty of Islamic Studies, Qatar American University of Sharjah, UAE, and University of Brunei in Dar es Salaam. Brunei, Dar es Salaam in Brunei. Professor Auda lectured on Islam and its law in dozens of countries and wrote 25 books in Arabic and English, some of which were translated into 25 languages. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Jasser.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته أخي قاسم ما شاء الله جزاك الله خير أخي الله يبارك فيك.
And so just to introduce our event here today before we kind of give Jasser Auda the floor here, our event is all about sighting and the calculations for the new moon in Ramadan. And we kind of want to focus on, the professor's knowledge of Maqasid Al-Shariah, right? And he'll discuss differentiating between means and ends and how this applies to moon calculations. And of course, as always, we're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the session. So you can type your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom or in the comment section of Facebook Live. Inshallah, this should be a great event. I'm very excited, very happy to be here. And I hope you guys all enjoy it as well. So with that all being said, you can go ahead, Dr. Jasser.
ما شاء الله جزاك الله خير أخي قاسم ما شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. It's such a pleasure to be back in Mac Calgary, despite the fact it's on Zoom this time. Inshallah, it should happen soon. And I was very intrigued by the topic that my brothers and sisters asked me to speak about, which has to do with the moon. And I thought that I will obviously address the issue of the moon calculations and so on, but perhaps because this is an issue in our community, perhaps I should address some more fundamental points, some more issues of thinking and methodology of approach to fiqh, and perhaps what is it and how we approach it. In the minutes that I have, perhaps this would be more useful. And I will get to the issue of calculation based on these introductions that perhaps would be obvious what the judgment of this issue would be. What is fiqh? Fiqh, فقه يفقه. Fiqh is not a number of books that were written in the history of Islamic civilization that we go and copy from. This is not fiqh. This is a myth. Fiqh is defined in the Quran. Allah defined fiqh, and His Prophet ﷺ defined fiqh. So we're not supposed to go and define fiqh with our whims and our politics and whatever we imagine is the truth, and we have the source of the truth. Allah said subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a group of every tribe or every party that should go out and acquire fiqh in the deen. Deen in Islam is not religion. Deen is a way of life. Deen is a religion in other places where you have a church and the church defines some sort of a pact between a number of people that they call religion. In Islam, deen is a way of life, is a comprehensive way of life. And that way of life, when you have fiqh in it, when you have a deep understanding, fiqh yafqah is linguistically is deep understanding and deep knowledge. When you have a deep knowledge of the deen, this is beyond the history of Islamic jurisprudence. This is about understanding Islam as a way of life. And Islam as a way of life, by the way, is not supposed to be defined in a secular way, as we defined it in the colonial period and post-colonial period. And therefore, we differentiate between the sciences of the Sharia and the sciences of the dunya, the Islamic education and the civil education. All of this is secular. All of this is a bid'ah. Deen in Islam has to do with ilm. And ilm includes the ilm of astronomy as much as it includes the ilm of biology and science and applied ilm like engineering and design and so on. and social ilm like political science and sociology and economics. In the Islamic civilization, when we were at our highest points, not our lowest points of fighting between factions and so on, but at the highest points of this Islamic civilization, fuqaha discussed issues of politics as chapters of fiqh called the Jasser Auda. They discussed issues of economics under the books of fiqh, which is called Al-Amwal wal-Kharaj. They discussed issues of sociology under fiqh. They called Al-Imran or Al-Umran. They discussed issues of science, and they calculated the diameter of the earth and the positions of the stars and all of that within their books of fiqh. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, was a mathematician as much as he was a faqih. And he did not really differentiate between the different kinds of sciences, because all of this is deen. If you approach ilm or science for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you understand that deeply, then you are into the realm of fiqh and fuqaha. Fuqaha in Islam, in the Quran, are not jurists only. The jurists are one kind of fuqaha, but fuqaha are also scientists of all sorts of science. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about fiqh in that sense, in the sense of deep understanding. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talked about fiqh in a number of senses that would illustrate, and the sunnah is a bayan of the Quran, as we know. وَنَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ. Allah sent the messenger as an illustrator, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-fuqaha uqada, hadith narrated by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ali ibn Abi Talib. You want to discuss the hadith on the side, we can do that. But basically he's saying that al-fuqaha are the leaders. Al-fuqaha uqada. And this means that people of fiqh are leaders of the community. They are not supposed to be on the side, like kind of a service where you give fatwa. The Sahaba were not like that. The fuqaha were the political leaders and the economic leaders, and they were the scientists, and they were the people of agriculture and people of building ships, and they were all fuqaha. So in that sense, the first point I would like to make is to perhaps widen the description and the definition of fiqh a little bit, and include the kind of encyclopedic knowledge that the Islamic civilization manifested and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about in the Quran in that sense. And when Imam Ali radiallahu anhu asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what do we do when we don't find a direct script in the Quran or what we face? He said, Shawirul fuqaha. So al-fuqaha are also the people of shura. You do shura amongst the people of deep understanding, the wise men of the community. This is fiqh proper. Now, another myth that fiqh is some sort of a majority exercise between historical books. And this is also a myth. As we define fiqh only as the legal side of Islam, this is very narrow. It is also very narrow to define fiqh as some sort of a voting between, I don't know how many schools you would like to vote between, 4 or 6 or 9 of the schools, or if you want to include the Thawri or Awza'i and so on, then you have 12 or 15 people, and then you say that the majority of scholars say this, therefore the truth is that. This is wrong. The truth in Islam is not a majority vote between the fuqaha of the past that we know of and we endorse for so many historical reasons. The truth in Islam goes with what's called a dalil. You have a dalil, you have an evidence, and the evidence leads you to the truth. It's not a majority exercise. The majority could be wrong. Yes, that is true, because they could be right for their time, but wrong for our time, for our technology, for our whatever kinds of trade we do, and currency and economics and politics. They could be talking about a different state when they deal with political issues. And therefore it is wrong to quote them today when we live in a different state and a different polity. They could be talking about a different currency and different markets and so forth. And it is wrong to quote them and impose that right on our stock markets and our derivatives and then we quote al-murabaha wal-muzabana wal-muhaqala wal-muajara and from the books of fiqh. That is wrong. That is a myth. What is fiqh? There is a difference between fiqh and the history of fiqh. The history of fiqh is very important for us to develop the faqih or the jurist, if you want to talk jurisprudence, and we're going to get into a juridical issue of the sighting of the moon and so on. But the faqih who studied the history of fiqh is not supposed to have this as the source of fiqh, because the source of fiqh is the Kitab wa Sunnah, is the book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger. As somebody who studied Islamic jurisprudence, and I taught it over a number of years, and my professorship is in Maqasid Al-Shariah, as my brother mentioned. I studied the history of fiqh, but I know that fiqh is not to copy from the histories of the past. In fact, several imams of fiqh, Imam al-Qarafi for one example, said al-jumudu ala al-manquli fil kutubi dalalun fid din. If you are only stagnant with what is written in the books, then you are going astray from the deen of Allah. Because this is not the deen, this is not how it is. Because the books have dealt with the issues of the time based on the worldview of the time and the technology of the time, and we're going to get to that. Therefore, fiqh is to learn the history and understand the history. You cannot be a mathematician without knowing the history of mathematics, or an astronomist without knowing the history of the development of, the telescopes and so on. This is just history. But you cannot say, well, I will deny my knowledge of today and I will quote Galileo or I will quote Galen. I am not going to do medicine of today, and which I see sometimes in some fiqh seminars, people are quoting Galen and so on for or Galinos for some debates over medicine, and medicine is a very different planet today from the planet of Galinos, and especially on issues of, we're not talking about issues of every place and time. We're talking about the definition of death, for example, which is a very complex issue. And people who are into medicine in the audience would know that it's not an easy task to get. And if you want to go back to when the scholars defined the signs of death as the fall of the nose or the change of the skin color, or we were going to bury half of our dead alive. Because the definition of death at that time was a very different definition. Today, yes, it's still controversial. Brain death is still controversial. I'm aware of that. I did some research on that recently for the Fiqh Council of North America. But this is a different story. We cannot really quote people for things that are subject to the place and time and subject to the technology. Now, it is actually not right that we don't differentiate between the fixed issues and the variable issues in Islam. The fixed issues are called al-sha'air, or the rituals. A looser word is al-ibadat, but it's not just ibadat as in salah and zakah and hajj, because there are fixed issues in mu'amalat too. In family law, for example, there are fixed issues. It is haram to marry 1, 2, 3, 4 of the women, your relatives, or the males, your relatives. That is fixed. That is sha'air too, this sha'ira. Whether you see a wisdom for it or not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it a fixed matter. Allah forbid there is a divorce, there is a iddah for 3 months. That is fixed. We're not going to change that based on, let's say, a test of pregnancy or something. Because yes, wisdom, one of the wisdoms is to make sure that the woman is not pregnant before she gets into another marriage. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He said, يا أيها النبي إذا طلقتم النساء فطلقوهن لعدتهن, that is clear and obvious and fixed. And we can talk about the fixed issues and how to define them in the Q&A, because it is quite a complex issue. But when you talk about the moon, I am really very surprised. I'm fascinated, wallahi, to see that people are debating that, because what is the point of the moon? What is that? إن عدة الشهور عند الله 12 شهرا في كتاب الله يوم خلق السماوات والأرض منها 4 حرم. Allah said in the Quran that when He created the heavens and earth, He made 12 months. 4 of them are Hurum. So we know that he's talking about the Hijri months, you know, what we know, the Ashhur al-Hurum, Rajab and the other 3. And so he made these months fixed from the time he created the heavens and earth. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the verses that my brother mentioned and read, Jazallah khair, he said, وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ لِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ. Allah is saying subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have to complete the number. What is the number? The number of days. Of what? Of the month. Is this something subject to different interpretations? Or is the month of Ramadan a natural month, a sunnah ilahiyya, a universal law? Like, is this a physical phenomena, or is it a jurisprudence issue? It is a physical phenomenon. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they couldn't calculate it. They went out and looked for it. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Sumu lur'yatihi wa aftiru lur'yatihi." Fast when you see it, when you see the crescent, and break your fast when you see the crescent. Different narrations of the hadith. If you can't see it, then complete the iddah, the number of days. Why? Because, well, we cannot see it, and we don't know what to do out in the desert. So let's complete the 30 days, and then the next day was going to be the 1st of Shawwal. But the 1st of Shawwal is a physical and objective and material fact. And we could be wrong if we don't see the crescent and we complete 30 days because there is clouds or the crescent is seen somewhere else or any of that. This is a physical fact. So now we can calculate 2 things. We can calculate the birth of the crescent, and we can calculate the visibility of the crescent. So what the scholars of the time, and now we're talking about fiqh, there is a difference between fiqh and the history books. Put the history books aside because they are not applying today with this issue. This issue today is about when does Shawwal start and when does Ramadan start. We don't want to fast in the last day of Sha'ban or skip the first day of Ramadan. And it's haram actually to fast the first day of Shawwal. That is the point. This is a sha'ira here. Now, a sha'ir, or the fixed matters, or the fixed rituals in Islam, we are not supposed to fast the first day of Shawwal. So how do I know the first day of Shawwal? Now, if I look at the crescent, if I'm in the desert, I can look at the crescent and then guess. If I'm not in the desert and I can calculate the moon, the visibility of the moon. Well, a few scholars said, let's look at the birth of the moon, which is a valid opinion. Again, it's not a majority kind of decision, but the overwhelming majority, and I think everybody today, from what I know from all of the fiqh councils, governmental and non-governmental, you see, fiqh is not supposed to be under governments, by the way, but that's something for the Q&A to discuss. Because once you have a fatwa council or a mufti who is a minister, then fiqh is corrupt, because fuqaha are supposed to have a distance from what's called al-umara. This is Islam. And once the faqih is as I heard it from one of them, muwazzaf, as an officer, that once the faqih is an officer, then really what he has to say has to be put in the political and economic context of the state and the struggles over power, etc. That's a different story. But let's say that we will acknowledge the fuqaha who work under governments and approve them as one of the opinions. I don't know of anybody today who really think that it is about the birth of the moon per se, but the visibility of the moon. So when we calculate our lunar months, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them from day one of the creation of the universe, we should calculate how visible the moon is. And there are some calculations in that in any case. And then you know that Ramadan is tomorrow, Shawwal is tomorrow. How do I know that by calculations Shawwal is tomorrow and I fast? That is haram. Because Shawwal is tomorrow. In anything, I'm going to look at my watch and I say that now it's 8:26. It is a fact. I am not going to take 2 opinions about it or go and look out really at the stars where they are now in order to tell you that it's not 8:26, my time anyway, here in Ottawa. So, I mean, it really, or I'm going to look at the calendar and pray. This is Dhuhr time. I'm not going to go take a stick and see whether now we have two shadows and so on, as we used to do in the history, because now we can calculate the time of Asr. We can calculate the time of Maghrib. When is the sunset? I asked Siri, when is sunset? Siri says sunset is at 7:25, 7:35 was it? It was today. So I broke my fast at 7:35. It's not, I didn't go out and look at the sun, you see. So I don't know what the difference is. The difference, my brothers and sisters, for those who are not aware, is politics. And politics has a lot to do with fiqh, by the way, from day one, from the middle of the 1st century. But this is another lecture and another long story. From the middle of the 1st century, there is a struggle between the political powers and leaders who would like to monopolize as much authority as possible over Muslim societies, and scholars, on the other hand, and people of truth who would like for the ummah to follow the dalil, to follow the evidence, and not to follow the whims of the politicians. So when I see that people are fasting following, I don't know, Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Nigeria or something, I get really concerned about the future of the Muslim ummah, because this is politics. Once you talk about these national states that the colonialists made before they leave, you are in dangerous territories here when it comes to fiqh. This is not fiqh, this is politics. Once you mention any state, then it is politics. And we're not supposed to follow the politics of the time for our moon. There are two opinions, if you want to study the history of that. To sum up, there are two opinions. There is no opinion that says Cairo or Mecca, or there are two opinions. وحدة المطالع واختلاف المطالع. If you want to study the history, two opinions. One of them says that if the moon appears anywhere on earth, then Muslims fast or break their fast. وحدة المطالع, the unity of the emergence of the moon. The other opinion is the diversity of the emergence of the moon, which means that every city, not country, not nation state, post-colonial, put this aside, every city, because there is a difference between north and south of every country, east and west. Some countries are huge, of those quote unquote Muslim countries are huge. And there is a difference in the matali', so if a city sees the moon, so we go by city, or we go by the theory that there is a unified moon for the earth. If the earth appears in South America, then everybody breaks their fast. There is no opinion in fiqh that says Mecca or Cairo or Baghdad or what's called Saudi Arabia or any of that. There is wahdat al-matali', the unity of the moon versus the diversity of the moon. Now, the European Council for Fatwa, after a long debate, and I'm a member of that council, an honor to be, decided that we're going to take the unity of the moon, which means that if the moon appears anywhere in the earth and visible, therefore, everybody actually is going to break fast, whether it's in Africa or in Arabia. You know, last year, it started in Africa. And I heard with my own ears from a number of Arabs, without mentioning nationalities here and there, oh, these are Africans, we're not going to fast after them, you see. And then it becomes a racist issue, which is fantastic. No, if it appears in Nigeria or Mali or Singapore or Argentina, then it becomes a moon, a valid moon. So the European Council for Fatwa did that, and then the Fiqh Council of North America, which used to be like founded by ISNA anyway. Now it's an independent organization in any case, even though ISNA endorses our opinions, and MAC endorsed our opinions as well, that we follow that calculation. And we have a number of countries, and it's increasing by the year, by the way, that is following this opinion, the calculations, that whatever appears in the world, we start our Ramadan. Some countries have an interest to keep the moon decision in their hand and to introduce some authority. That's their business, that's their politics. But for Canada and for I guess the minorities countries where we don't have these dynamics between Islam and the polity, we are not supposed to go by any country. We are just going by the calculations of the moon. And as you know, this is the natural beginning of Ramadan and the natural beginning of Shawwal, in addition to being very convenient for us to take breaks or to organize our work. Most of us work in places where the majority are not Muslim, and it's important for you to tell your company or your university, if you're a professor or a student, or your school, if you're a teacher, that I'm going to be off for this day of Eid beforehand. But this is not the dalil. The dalil is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. When you witness the month, obviously the witness is not necessarily with your own eyes. And I see debates sometimes in some of these fiqh councils between the telescope and the binoculars, and some scholars differentiate. Actually, many scholars today differentiate. When they say we are going to look, we're going to use the binoculars only, but if you use a telescope, and they started to get into how many centimeters the telescope is, because they do not want to acknowledge that it is a matter of technology. It is not a matter of seeing really with my own eyes. And if I see with my glasses now and I don't see much with my without my glasses, is it valid? Is this a technology? What's the difference between my glasses and the mathematics of calculating the beginning of Shawwal? And then how long is the telescope? What if I can just go and stand on the moon, actually, as the humanity did half a century ago, and calculate when the moon starts? So I hope that I meant for this to be light, not to be really an academic lecture, and I hope that you take my remarks on a light note rather than any I think let's say exclusivity of the truth or any of that. And Allahu A'lam, I'm just telling my opinion and the opinion of so many scholars that I learned from. And Allahu A'lam. Jazakumullah khair. I'm looking forward to Q&A, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Barakallah fiqh, Doctor. I think, inshallah, we all benefited from this, and we appreciate you, taking that kind of light approach. As you mentioned, like, this is kind of an issue that kind of gets blown up, when in reality, it's something that's, I think, very comprehensible and something that we can at least have discussions about, inshallah ta'ala. It's always a pleasure to hear you talk, Dr. Jasser. I'm your student.
It's great to see you. Great to see you.
Yeah, I'm your student in the revival program with Dr. Ihab, and when you came and you gave that lecture about terms and how sometimes we have like words like salah and how those don't translate directly to prayer, my mind was blown.
Well, listen, the course ends by the end of the year, inshallah, so we're going to have fun with it, inshallah.
More mind-blowing sessions, inshallah.
Allah yakrimak. Allah yakrimak. I hope, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us all to the truth, inshallah.
Ameen. So we definitely have questions, if you're okay to just jump right in.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I think the first one that I'd like for you to address here, I think that is a really important one, is, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but, which comes first? Unity within your city, right? Like unity and kind of solidarity with your city and across different organizations following moon sightings or calculations, right? So, i.e. to be able to fast and celebrate Eid at the same time, or stick to the calculations method and try to embrace and educate people to embrace this method?
My opinion is the second. Stick to the calculations and try to educate people that this is the right way to go. I believe that, again, the truth is not a majority exercise. Yes, I know that unity is very important within a city, but if the majority of people in a city are following their whims, really, or following countries, nation states for their moon sighting, or claiming that they go and look at the moon while we can calculate where the moon is, I think that this has been the dilemma of Muslim fuqaha, Muslim leaders from day one. many of the Sahaba did not like the changes that happened in the first century in the political system and the economic system and so forth. And there were lone voices, Abu Dharr, for an example, Imam Hussein, for another example, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, etc., Abdullah ibn Umar. If you go and study the history, you will find that people who had a vision for the Ummah that it was much better than the vision that the forces to be had were minority, were really lone voices. And some of them lost their lives over the vision of going back to the Khilafah and distributing the public wealth equally amongst people and so forth. And that, so like, if you ask my opinion, I think it's better, even if you're a lone voice, but you have a very strong argument, it's better to stick with that argument. I think that people will come around. We had this debate in Europe, by the way, for some time, because I used to live in Europe about 15, 20 years ago. And yes, now in Europe, nobody really goes on sides the moon. So perhaps, inshallah, in your lives, perhaps not ours, 20 years from now, you guys are going to have, inshallah, unity around the calculations of the moon, inshallah. Love this.
Yep. Jazakallah khairan. And I guess a follow-up onto that is then, and you kind of mentioned this as well, how there can be kind of, how a majority opinion can be wrong. But how do we reconcile this with like the emphasis that's placed on like ijma' and unity in our tradition, or like the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "La tajtama' ummati ala dalala," you know, my ummah does not come together on misguidance.
Exactly. That is the only hadith that is valid and the only dalil that is valid for ijma', by the way. When he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, "La tajtama' ummati ala dalal," which means that if the ummah of Muhammad agrees on something, that something is not going to be off track. It's not going to be wrong. And if the majority of the ummah or the overwhelming agrees on something and it's wrong, some of us will correct the others. Some of the members of the ummah of Muhammad, because we will never agree on something that is wrong. But that ijma' al-ummah, Imam al-Ghazali mentioned, for example, that is different from the ijma' al-usuli, the ijma' of the fuqaha that everybody claims. I have a book on usul al-fiqh I teach from and so forth called Maqasid Al-Shariah as a philosophy of the Islamic law. And in that humble book, I counted the definitions of ijma' from the 9 schools that I studied in the book. And when I teach comparative fiqh, I teach from the 9 schools. We had 53 different definitions of ijma'. So you can see that there is no ijma' on the definition of ijma', let alone on issues like the moon and stuff. There is no, you know, people who say ijma', I think they are talking about the trend on the internet. Perhaps they are like the popular hashtags in whatever. I'm not on social media, so I really don't know, but I know, I hear about these things. So perhaps they talk about the hashtag that they think is popular, and then they talk about ijma'. And you hear this, and no, this is not an issue of ijma'. By the way, if you even talk about the 4 Sunni schools that people usually refer to, Ash-Shafi'iyya are very strong about calculations. And read Ibn Rushd, for example, in Bidayat al-Mujtahid. If you really want to get into the fiqh issue, read Ibn Rushd in Bidayat al-Mujtahid in the comparisons and see him citing Ash-Shafi'iyya on the yaqiniyyat al-hisab. Like if you think that what you calculate is yaqini, is mathematically sound or mathematically confirmed, then you have to go by that, he said. So it's not, there is no ijma' on this, even in the past, let alone in the present. So the unity of the community has nothing to do with the ijma' al-usuli, you know, the ijma' of the ummah. That's different, you see.
Jazakallah khair. Another question. I guess this is kind of looking for your advice. But basically, this individual is saying that, you know, when we in the community are fasting on different days, or we have Eid on different days, it kind of creates like a bad image in front of non-Muslims. So in terms of like now, if there's a Muslim who wants to come and learn about Islam, how are they going to know where they're going to go for reliable and dependable Islamic information if different organizations are saying different things? So I guess the question here for you is, how do we approach that? And what would be our advice to anyone looking into Islam and how to approach the organizations?
Well, it's obviously better if we have Eid on the same day, but if we have different opinions, it's just the nature of Islam. I mean, it's not supposed to be like that. From my perspective, everybody has to just simply go by the confirmed mathematics. But even if people want to go out in the desert and sign the moon or whatever it is, sight the moon, and we have different opinions, we have different ways of standing in the prayers. We have different ways of reading the Fatiha. We have different ways of wudu. We have different, sometimes like minor conditions in contracts for trade or marriage, or like, as Muslims, diversity is part of Islam anyway. And this should be tolerable, by the way. Like, if people have different days of Eid, we should not fight over this, but we should see it as diversity. And when you fast and break your fast with everybody else in Canada, for example, MAC mosques, you are not alone, you are part of a bigger community. Yes, you might be alone in a city if the other people have a different opinion, which is fine, but you are also part of a bigger community, in fact, a worldwide community that is fasting and breaking the fast now according to the calculation that was proposed in like moonsighting.com and European Council for Fatwa. It was jointly, and then different countries were involved and started to calculate with their like big apparatuses of calculations, and universities like Turkey, and then eventually other Muslim countries in Africa and in the Arab world increasingly. And now you have a community of people who break their fast in the beginning of Shawwal, as the moon starts to be visible. So you are not alone, and diversity is fine too. We can tolerate diversity amongst people. But I think the opinion that people fast and break their fast according to some nation state in the East, I think this has to change, because this is wrong. This is not just an opinion. You want to go out and sight the moon with your eyes, that is an opinion. I think it's incorrect, but it's not haram to do that. But it is haram to break your fast because of a country, because there is no opinion like that. Sharia did not say governments and nation states. This is not the right opinion. So if people want to go and sight the moon themselves, they have a valid reason to have a different opinion. But if they're just going to copy somebody from some government, this is not. It's not وحدة المطالع. It's not اختلاف المطالع. It's really none of the opinions that anybody ever thought about in Islam. Allahu A'lam.
Jazakallah khair. I totally agree. I think that the diversity that we have with certain issues in Islam, it's part of the beauty, wallahi. It's part of the evidence that Islam is rahmatan lil alameen. The Prophet Muhammad was rahmatan lil alameen, a mercy for all of mankind, for all times and places. And to move on, maybe we'll take a little bit of a break, and we'll definitely come back to this issue, but maybe a break from these kind of issues and kind of a different question here. And so this question is saying, what would you say the impacts of secularism are on Western Islamic scholarship? You mentioned secularism a little bit at the beginning of the talk.
Time. Yeah, well, thank you. This is a good break, really. Thank you, brother. Secularism has impacted the definition of Islam in the Muslim majority countries. To start with, we have to see the depth of the problem of colonization. Colonization wanted to usurp all the power there is in the Muslim societies. And the majority of authority and the majority of wealth in the Muslim societies were embodied in what's called al-awqaf, or the endowments. And the colonizers, everybody, Portuguese and the Brits and the Dutch and the Russians and the Japanese, everybody who occupied the Muslim majority lands. And the French, obviously, they wanted to attack the awqaf, or the endowments. Why? Because they guaranteed the sustenance of the Islamic educational institutes. The awqaf spent on the Islamic universities. If you want to be a Muslim talib ilm, you want to be a student of knowledge, you just apply to the waqf and take your sustenance and be a talib ilm. So education and health, by the way, which is something we could talk about in the current context, was not under governments and was not a business. Education was a waqf. And hospitals were awqaf as well, were non-profits. Yes, I know they are non-profits in Canada. And this is actually a very similar system to the system that we had in the Islamic civilization, where they were not non-profits, they were awqaf. They were made with special legislation that they are owned by none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the land is Allah's anyway. So you put your money in the hospital, and whoever wants to be treated, they go there. They are not tied. The hospital system and the health system was not tied to the pharma industry as it is today, or the pharma industry of the time. And therefore, it was free from that. And it was not like we see in many Muslim majority countries. It's not under government. It's not a government department to have your hospitals or have your universities, and the deans are appointed by the security forces. No, it's not like that. The Sheikh of Al-Azhar or Zaytuna or any of the major mosques in India, they were appointed by the ulama, and the ulama would kind of vote or choose. What does this have to do with secularism? Because secularism came and destroyed the definition of fiqh to mean only al-ibadat, al-salah wal-zakah wal-hajj, and al-ahwal al-shakhsiyya, the family law, perhaps a little bit of that. And yes, you can refer to the Shafi'iyya and Malikiyya. But you want to do a court even for the other issues, what they call the civil courts. Now, this is outside Islam. You want to study economics or politics, this is no longer in the madrasa or in the Jami'ah al-Islamiyya. You study politics and economics in the civil university. And you study sociology and psychology and architecture and so forth. So the Islamic education started to have a schizophrenia between studying the history of the Islamic jurisprudence, and they call this Islamic studies, versus all other kinds of knowledge and types and disciplines and fields and phenomena that are studied in a secular way. We have an issue here living in a secular system in the study of Islam from a secular perspective. Because if you study Islam in U of T or any of the universities here, you're not going to study Islam, you're going to study Muslims. And you are going to define Islam in a partialistic way. Islam becomes the Islamic jurisprudence, which actually happened in colonization and post-colonization even more. Islam is going to be the study of a certain period of an Islamic history. But Islam is never going to be the Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and Sunnah, then you go and try to build a seminary, or you do something else. We're trying to have an Islamic college registered with the government, and this is a very big issue, because you are not supposed to have a college or a university that's called Islamic in Canada, unless it's confessional, it's under a mosque. You see, that schism that belongs to the secular philosophy is not Islamic. In Islam, we study politics as a chapter of fiqh. We study medicine as a chapter of fiqh. You see, that's different. So what I advise is to study Muslims, yes, through the secular system, if you're going to study Islam in one of the Canadian universities, but to really work on your methodology. Because what is your approach as you study Muslim societies? Is it a deconstructionist approach a la Nietzsche or Foucault? Or you see, you're going to study justice. What is your approach? How do you define justice? From Rawls or from Marx? Or or are you going to define justice from an Islamic point of view? So I advise those who do Islamic studies in secular universities to really be very careful with their methodology, with their approach, and make sure that if you are going to quote Rawls or Marx on issues of justice, you have to criticize them. And you have to make sure that you have your own Islamic definition of social justice that you are studying. You have to have your own Islamic definition of psychological health, for example. Don't approach the psychology in a Freudian way, you know, and then call it Islamic by quoting Maqasid Al-Shariah and Hifz al-Din wal-Nafs wal-Aql, which is typical. You know, people do whatever they want to do from a secular perspective, and then they put a hat on it from the Hifz al-Din wal-Nafs, the preservation of life, and Sharia is all about development and all about human rights. No, it isn't, because development in the Sharia is defined differently, and human rights are defined differently. And you have to go back to the Sharia concepts proper, which is in the Quran and Sunnah, by the way, not necessarily in the history books, and see how I'm going to define rights. Al-Huquq, Al-Haq is a Quranic word. So just to, you know, try to be brief, to be careful with your methodology if you're going to approach Islamic studies in secular institutions.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Yani, I completely agree. I think it's really, really important for us to go back and look at kind of how the history of colonialism has impacted our thought and, you know, our frameworks for thinking. And this is something that, yani, in my small circles I've called for a long time. Exactly what you mentioned, not putting just an Islamic hat on certain academic sciences. For example, I think psychology is a big one. Studying psychology from Islamic perspective, right? And from Islamic
theology. This morning I was, well, even archaeology and even sciences that we think are hard sciences. Like this morning I was in a seminar, we were discussing some stuff related to America and the discovery of America. And some of the attendees were fascinated when I told them that Muslims discovered America before the end of the 1st century. And every Muslim history book, Al-Mas'udi, and everybody who wrote about Islamic history wrote about North and South America. And Imam al-Sha'bi in the 1st century Hijri, Imam al-Sha'bi died 100 Hijri, right? Imam al-Sha'bi is saying, Inna Allah ibadan wara al-Andalus, and then he started to describe people beyond the Andalus, where the distance between them and Andalus is like the distance between Andalus and Kufa, which is actually quite accurate. If you go from Lisbon to Caracas, what he was talking about. And he is talking about Islam there. This is like what, 6th century, 7th century before Columbus, let alone what happened after that, and the kingdom of Mali, and the reaching there, and Andalusia pre-Fernando and these people. So we have a different even history of archaeology and history of Islam in this part of the world that we haven't researched, because from the secular perspective, Columbus discovered America. Before that, America had nobody, had some cannibals that he killed, alhamdulillah, and khalas. But no, it's not like that. America had its people, and some of them were from Africa, who were Muslim, from Mali particularly, and some of them were from Andalusia, who draw the maps of this part of the world hundreds of years before Columbus. And this is well documented, but we don't take an Islamic approach. That's an example of taking a secular method as you approach a topic where Islam has a lot to say about, but you are kind of building on the wrong premise, kind of thing. So
just to go back to our original topic here, if that's okay with you, we have a question I'll just read to you, inshallah. The question mentions ISNA is using 17.5 for Fajr and 15 for Isha. Moonsighting.com collected observations for Subh Sadiq and disappearance of Shafaq from many places in the world. These observations show that no fixed degrees can be used for Fajr and Isha, and this function of latitude and seasons. My question is, how accurate are the 17.5 and 15 for Calgary? Some brothers confirmed that Shafaq Ahmar was still clear, observed outside of Calgary, even after the scheduled Isha times. And then a follow-up thing, just like expanding on the question. The question would be to us then, what method are they using and how is it compliant with Shafaq time? And I think the using is referring to MAC.
Yes, yes, I agree. There is no fixed degree because the degrees are approximations. The latest that we did the research in the Fiqh Council of North America, which is like originally it's the ISNA calendar, what's called the ISNA calendar. This is the Fiqh Council of North America. The latest session that we had last month, 2 months ago, we discovered that the different points in North America, we're talking about Canada and the United States, the different points in North America has different degrees when it comes to alamat al-fajr. Al-fajr, if you take al-fajr as an example, the dawn, there is alamat al-fajr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. ثم أتموا الخيط الأبيض الخيط الأسود. The black string and the white string, and the black streak, if you wish, and the white streak. The Prophet ﷺ explained further, and he said, when you see the vertical line, this is not al-fajr. Wait until you see al-shafaq al-ahmar. That's a hadith disputed, but let's say that the Prophet ﷺ, to amalgamate all the hadith, he said, until you see the light horizontal, not vertical. Now, the horizontal light at Fajr is not seen at 15, let alone 17 or 18. 17 or 18 is totally dark, by the way, even in the Middle East. And this is something that is being proposed to be corrected in Arab countries, but the politics, there's a lot of politics with that. But basically, the 18 degrees of the Egyptian Fatwa Council or the Saudi Council, this is not accurate. And it's not me saying, it's Bin Baz and Ali Jum'ah and these people, they already have that documented. Go on the net and you will find it. 18 is not accurate. 15 is closer to the horizontal. But we realized that sometimes the horizontal light is at 11 and sometimes even at 9 degrees, depending on what? Depending on the days during the year and the seasons. And of course, depending on the atmosphere and the weather. But if the weather is clear, depending on whether you are in a valley or on a hill, depending on a number of factors. So basically, what we decided to issue in the Fiqh Council lately is that there is a plus or minus half an hour for the announced degrees. And I know the scholars debated. I was of the opinion of publishing that Muslims, there is plus or minus half an hour. So take a look or just go by the calculation and know that it's plus or minus half an hour. I like that kind of fatwa, but many of my colleagues were concerned that people will be confused and people will say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They should give us a time or an angle. But it's not like that. The angle is an ijtihad, is a reasoning kind of approximation. But the Sharia doesn't have an angle. The Sharia has the sign. And the sign differs if you are in the valley or on top of the mountain, in the same region, or if you are in the summer or the winter. And this is now well documented that the angle is not for all year round and is not for every region, even within a city. So long story short, take the numbers if you're comfortable with them, or do as I do. I take the numbers, but I also look. You know, I just look in our backyard, and if I see the lights, whatever the numbers are telling me, I stop my suhoor, because this is the light. Yes, the calendar is saying after 10 minutes, but I see the light. And if I see darkness, I continue to eat personally until I see the light or start to appears like a light, I stop. If people don't want to do that, they just go by the numbers, but know that the numbers are not set in stone. I hope that this answers the question. You said, Mac, go by what? Sorry, in the question. The last sentence.
Yeah, the last sentence just said, the question would be to Mac then, what method are they using and how is that in compliance with Shafaq timing?
Yeah, well, yeah. So then Mac endorses the Fiqh Council of North America. because the headquarters in MAC asked me to pass them the decisions of the Fiqh Council of North America, and I did. So MAC endorsed that with ISNA and a number of organizations anyway. So that is the method. How is this compatible with the Shafaq? No, it will depend on the region. So if you are interested in that and you are a person of reason and mind, you're not a simple person. If you're a simple person or somebody is asking you in the mosque, tell them just go by the calendar. And it's an approximation, and inshallah khair. But if you're a person of reason or reasoning, just walk in your backyard and look. And if it's still dark, continue to eat, because it's not Fajr yet. The Sharia, Imam Shatibi has a very interesting sentence, Al-Shari'atu Ummiyya. Sharia is for the illiterate, it's for everybody. It's for the lettered and the non-lettered. The non-lettered are supposed to have a simple way of knowing. That's when they used to go out and look for the crescent in the desert, or they just look until the white light is obvious in the sky, this kind of thing. If you are more sophisticated than that, Sharia is for you too, but then you will have to have a nuanced and a compound kind of approach. So I suggest that your compound approach would be the numbers that you have in the calendar, but to also look. I personally do that. I look out, and if it's still dark, I continue to eat. And I don't pray Fajr if it's dark, because it is not right. You know, you're not supposed to pray Fajr. Sometimes you pray Fajr and you go out of the mosque in some countries, and it is totally dark still, even after Fajr, after the reading of the Quran and all of that. And it's not supposed to be like that, because Fajr, the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّ بِلَالًا يُؤَذِّنُ بِلَيْلٍ. Bilal, the first adhan, is in the evening. فَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يُؤَذِّنْ ابن أم مكتوم. Eat and drink until Ibn Maktoum, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the Sahaba radiallahu anhuma, anyway, who gave the adhan. وَكَانَ ابن مكتوم رَجُلًا أَعْمَى لا يؤذن حتى يقال أصبحت أصبحت. He was a blind man, Ibn Maktoum. He would sit in the mosque until the people around him tell him, أصبحت, the morning is here. So he goes out and gives the adhan. So obviously, from this hadith, and that was the debate in the European Council for Fatwa, where you know, the degrees, we took down the degrees to 11 and sometimes to 9. Why? Because it is obvious from the hadith that they are talking about an obvious Fajr, not the if I can, I don't know if I can cite the different. I was just looking at it for a fiqh. They are not talking about the astronomical twilight. They are not talking about the astronomical Fajr, which is how the Brits calculated the 18 degrees first for Egypt, and then the Arab world just copied the 18 degrees. It was the Brits who did that, not Muslims even. But they are talking about the nautical Fajr, not the civil Fajr. The civil twilight is different. The civil twilight is obvious. But you are talking about some time during the nautical period. During that period, sometime it becomes light. But as I said, it really depends on the region. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it this way for the Sharia to be flexible, not to be hard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my brother read, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah wants facilitation and not difficulty. So don't be too scared. I mean, if you think it's dark and you eat, Allah will forgive you, inshallah. It's not about, yani Allah is not after us to, to subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is Rahman Rahim. So it's not about that. But if you think that you see light, stop eating. Allahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khairan for that answer. And we'll just take this last question. I think this kind of is like, your answer right now is a good segue into this question. We'll conclude with this question, inshallah. The question is, what ways do you recommend the Muslim youth, like university students, to gain a foundational, holistic understanding of Islam and particularly fiqh? Would you recommend a specific program or course in some kind of online university, or would you recommend any introductory books to read?
I recommend the Quran, and I'm serious about it. We don't take the Quran seriously. I recommend, if you are a young man or woman, to learn Arabic. When I came to this country, I did not speak a word of English. I did not understand anything when I came here to become a student. I didn't understand the first lecture, nothing from what the professor was saying, especially with the American accent. I was kind of used to the English accent back in the Arab world. And I think you can see that my English is all right. Over the years, when you learn Arabic, you are going to have al-malaka. Al-malaka is the talent of the mantiq, the logic of the language. Arabic has a logic. Learn Arabic. So, and I am serious. This is more important than any online program or a program that where you go and study the books of fiqh in history, or learn Arabic and memorize the Quran, not just memorization as in just putting it to memory, but learn to have fiqh in the Quran. Try to understand this book. We don't take the book seriously. I was just reading, for example, the ayah that Allah is saying that there is no animal on earth or a bird in the sky, but communities like you. And I was saying, we don't take it seriously. They are communities like us. They have relations. They have rules. They have their own kinds of marriage and their own kinds of children rearing and this and that. And actually, they are more advanced than us in some ways. When the ducks go south and come back, I cannot do that on my foot with nothing but the stars. This is very high technology, you see. And when the cat is lost 5 kilometers away and comes back home by the stars, that is a very sophisticated. So when we read umamun amthalukum in the Quran, for one example, communities like you, we don't think that these cats and dogs and chicken and birds, they are communities like us, let alone to think that they are actually more advanced than us in many ways. The Quran shapes your worldview, your tasawwur, if we're going to speak in the fiqh language. Tasawwur is the perception, the visualization of things, the definition. It will shape your definitions, really. So my advice is to read the Quran, learn Arabic. It has its own logic, and the sounds are tied to the meanings, and it is a fascinating language. Learn it properly. And alhamdulillah, there are so many programs that could teach you Arabic, and so many programs that focus on this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focus on that, inshallah. And the tafsir should be an additional information kind of thing, because you see, every tafsir is the perception of the person who does the tafsir. And every scholar has insights into the Quran. But unless the tafsir is saying that Rasulullah ﷺ said, it's called the tafsir bil-athar. Unless you're talking about the tafsir of the Quran with the hadith, yeah, that is part of the Quran, part of the wahy, part of the revelation. But if so-and-so is saying Zamakhshari or Tabari or Ibn Kathir, no, that is not Quran. That is their view of the Quran. And you should read as many as you wish, but you should have your own insights of this book. We're not asking you to give fatwa. We're asking you to learn your book that Allah sent for your guidance and your worldview and your akhlaq, your morality. It will define your morality. It's the rope between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the month of Ramadan, I really cannot recommend any other book but this Quran, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
We have one last question. I think is really important to address, if that's okay with you.
I don't mind. I'm here. No problem.
Okay. And this, inshallah, will be the final one. So the question reads: the cities or communities in North America who are following Saudi Arabia in determining the beginning and end of Ramadan, are they wrong or is it okay?
Yes, they are wrong on a number of levels. One of them, there is no fiqh opinion that says Saudi Arabia or says Mecca. I mean, if to be less sarcastic, there is no fiqh opinion that says Mecca. Nobody says that Muslims should fast according to Mecca. There are two opinions and two interpretations. One of them, we fast with the unity of the moon anywhere on earth. And one of them is to fast in different regions and different localities. But nobody ever in the history of Islamic jurisprudence has said that we fast according to Mecca or Medina. That's number one. Number two, I would like, if you are interested in what Saudi Arabia does in the world, to read about the history of Saudi Arabia, even from the English books or whatever it is. But read about the history. Educate yourself, please. It's very important. I come from that region, by the way, originally from Mecca. I know it very well. It's very important that you understand how the countries function in the Arab world, and especially in that part of the world where there is an authority over Mecca and Medina and the holy places, and the organization and so on, which is fine. But you have to read a little bit about the politics of it, so you understand that when a decision like that is kept in the hands of the authority and not according to simple calculations, or when it's very difficult to correct, for example, their miscalculation of Fajr. Even when Sheikh bin Baz was the Mufti of Arabia at that time, he called for this calculation to be revised. But they want to keep the stability of, they don't want to shake things, you see. And that's how they think, surprisingly, but that's how they think. Because Islam is not their issue. Don't want to speak too much politics, but I'm just asking you to, before you talk about Saudi Arabia, go read, please. Read about the history of the Arab world and how basically the colonialists drew the borders of the Arab world, especially the Arab world, and of course the Indian subcontinent and the Malay world too. The same story. How these were drawn for the sake of dividing the booties, really, and the control and so on, and to develop these national identities between the ummah is wrong, because we are one ummah. And yes, one ummah politically and economically, we are supposed to be. And it doesn't mean that we don't have provinces or localities or governments. We can. But the way we are going about the ummah is against the maqsid, or the objective of unity of the ummah. So we have different sultans and different kings and so on, and they're all fighting with each other. That is not Islamic. So when they do that, it has a lot to do with the moon, by the way, because if you are going to fight with your brother, then Islam is not your issue. It is not about that. If you are going to kill millions of people in Yemen, then Islam is not your issue. Then don't give me a fatwa on moon or on marriage or any of that, because you are not trusted for that. And I am just saying it clearly and candidly for those who would care to think about it, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair once again, Dr. Jasser. I think many of us really benefited from your time and your presence here. We really appreciate you kind of giving us this talk here in Calgary. We would love to have you again in the near future for a follow-up, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah.
I'll just end with the dua here. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ووفقنا إلى الحق والطريق المستقيم ببركة القرآن العظيم. اللهم اكشف عنا ما أهمنا وغمنا واختم بالصالحات الباقيات أعمالنا وعلى الإيمان الكامل والسنة توفنا وأنت راض عنا يا كريم. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. وصلى اللهم وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
بارك الله فيكم.
وفيك إن شاء الله. Thank you so much everyone for joining. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
السلام ورحمة الله.